go through it all is just a great patriot, somebody who is just doing so much wonderful work. Out of all the great people out there fighting corruption, I've got to say Mike Adams is right up there at the top from Natural News. Of course, he is the health ranger, and we're going to go through all of this. The solar flares, the vaccines, the TSA, and the fact that he narrowly has survived. You're talking just 100 yards away, helicopters dumping, putting out fires. So he can't be in studio because he's still got the fires at bay as he lives outside Austin, ravaged. Mike Adams, great to have you here with us.
Hey, Alex, great to be joining you. Thanks for having me on.
Mike, I've thrown out all these issues. What do you want to tackle first?
Well, let's talk about the solar flares. And now segueing from the fires of Central Texas, which were quite devastating. You know, I'm into personal preparedness, as you are, and most of your listeners are. But when those fires hit, I realized I had a huge gap in my preparedness plan. I did not have a fire respirator and fire gear. So I immediately made sure that I had that covered. And then, so I actually ordered products and got them in. And now I can actually fight fires to some degree that are in my front yard if I have to. But then I also began to ask questions, where else do I have gaps in personal preparedness? What are the real risks to safety, to growing food, to surviving on our planet? Now, you hinted at this. One of the things that the U.S. government does just maliciously and insidiously is they make people think that things that aren't dangerous are very, very dangerous, like so-called terrorism. And then at the same time, they ignore the things that are really dangerous and make them seem like they're not dangerous at all, like Fukushima, for example, or now what is theoretically a big risk of a big risk in our lifetime. Not today, not tomorrow, but over a human lifetime. It's a very real risk that a solar flare could knock out the power grid, and it could knock it out for years in some places, and it could disconnect power from the nuclear facilities that are trying to run coolant pumps to keep their fuel rods from going into a meltdown status.
Well, that's right, Mike. We are such a dependent society now, and technology is great, but it's a double-edged sword. It took 80 years or more to build our modern system. And when a little tornado comes through or a hurricane, you can have places out for 3-4 months, and it's a national effort to get it back up. But if you have widespread systems knocked out, then it causes a cascading where you're literally knocked back to the Stone Age. And you're right. Yes. They estimate, because they've been studying the sun for more than 300 years in a modern scientific fashion, that these solar flares are a 100-year event. The problem is it appears we're entering one of those in the next decade. So you're right, it's a once-in-a-lifetime deal, but we're here, and 100 years ago, we didn't have these systems to be knocked out. But if you go back 100 years ago, there were events with solar flares that did blow out some of the early cities, that did have electrical systems, and it's happening now. And it's not just you saying this.
No, not at all. NASA has put out information about this. Oak Ridge National Laboratories actually calculated the risk of a large solar flare knocking out a nuclear facility, and it calculated that risk as being 33% over the 40-year lifetime of a typical nuclear power plant. So that's a 1/3 or 33 in 100 chance for every nuclear facility that exists out there. But the really, well, you could say good news or bad news is that these events, and the last big one was called the Carrington event in 1859. So that's pre-modern technology, that's pre-electrical grid for the most part, and that's pre-nuclear power plants all over the country.
They'll make wash lines outside in some areas literally light up with electricity.
Exactly. They had telegraph lines, and power surged through the telegraph lines and actually lit up. And they could disconnect their batteries, and they could still send telegraphs in some areas because there was so much power surging through these lines. But modern civilization, with its reliance on nuclear power, and there are well over 400 nuclear power plants operating every day around the world, this system has never faced a Carrington-scale event, a solar flare, that could wipe out the power grid.
And underwriting laboratories,
Oak Ridge,
and other systems that carry out these inspections.
Oh, yes.
From my research, they've never even called for electronics and things to be even somewhat shielded. I mean, the establishment has known, at least in the last 50, 60 years, about this electromagnetic pulse and other things that the sun can cause, and they've made no preparation except in their systems. And this is almost like a nuclear war level type crisis, because we've got 7 billion people, more than half of them totally urban and dependent on technology. And if we were to have even a partial knockout, I mean, this is catastrophic.
Well, yeah, it's not just losing electricity and losing the satellites and losing the power grid. It's the fact that hundreds of nuclear power plants could then go into a meltdown situation and unleash Fukushima-scale events times hundreds, which would irradiate the soils, irradiate the oceans, irradiate the atmosphere, and it would make human life on our planet virtually unlivable for perhaps a year, perhaps a couple of years.
Exactly. That's why I called it as bad as a nuclear war, not being clear. You're absolutely right. Now, and again, and the government admits this themselves, and major corporations, and you source it all in your article. You're not speculating here. Why do you think there's this irrational chutzpah or bravado in the establishment? I mean, even after Fukushima has been for 6 months raining radiation down, California as far east as Vermont, many levels higher in isotopes in milk, in lettuce, and their answer was, we'll just raise the isotope between 1,000 times and 100,000 times, depending on what isotope, and just wave a wand and say it's safe. So do they really believe if they just say reactors exploding and radiating us, if they just wave it and say everything's fine? I mean, I'm all into technology. And I know they've even have a lot of cleaner, safer nuclear technologies, but there's no attempt to move to those. They're building more of the old designs. I mean, what's wrong with these people? With the GMO, with the nuclear weapons, with all of it, it's like they want to destroy us.
Well, you're exactly right. There are nuclear power designs that can passively cool the fissionable materials without using electric pumps, but those designs have not been incorporated widely or at all, actually. So that has been abandoned. Instead, they favor the General Electric designs that require more pumps and more maintenance and more upkeep. But overall, there is an inherent arrogance in the scientific community, not only when it comes to nuclear power, but also medicine. There's an arrogance about vaccines, that vaccines have to work, and they must work because we say they do, not
it's
because
a cult.
of any
I
evidence.
mean, doctors have one of the highest suicide rates. They have one of the lowest life expectancies. It's the same with top scientists. You meet these people, and they're usually neurotic and literally think they're geniuses. And when you talk to them, they're only smart in a specialized area. They don't have general knowledge. Now, I meet other scientists and people that have general knowledge, and they're tuned in and awake. But it seems like the establishment goes for this centralized type, arrogant, know-it-all person.
Yeah, that's exactly what's out there, and that's what's dominated the vaccine industry. That is what has dominated even the energy industries. You know, science has a lot of promise, but it has also given us, sadly, a lot of circle the wagons, circular logic, the self-supporting scientists who abandon ideas that should really be able to help us, such as, for example, free energy technology, which I believe exists. We know cold fusion
or
exists.
Even regular off the grid. They won't come and inspect and give you the permit in most states.
That's right.
If you have your own off the grid, they'll harass you. But, oh, everything's government paid for if you tie into the grid. Well, now you're still part of the grid, and I think that's one of the big drivers. There's a lot of reasons here, but I want your take on this, and we'll get into other issues. Because big corporations, and I'm all for free market, but these are monopoly men, invest in different technological ideas. Once they invest in it, there can't ever be any oversight. They can't ever admit dangers because now it's seen simply as a product.
Well, that's right, and what's really astonishing is that by running our world on these dangerous nuclear power designs, they're putting human civilization in grave danger. They're risking everything. They're risking the future of human life on our planet in order to protect their corporate profits in the nuclear power industry. We need to dismantle. I mean, look, I've never been an opponent of nuclear power just to be an opponent of it. But now understanding this risk of a solar flare and how it could cascade into the power systems, I think we must really look at changing nuclear power to a passive cooling design or dismantling the existing power structures.
Look, this is a 1940s type system. It's extremely dangerous. It's a huge industry now in nuclear weapons. and the rest of it. That's why they go with the old reactor systems, is so they get fissile material to build more weapons.
That's right.
And they're destroying our entire future. You know, Dr. Busby, who advises the EU and the British government, he said a lot of his colleagues think they're doing all of this to reduce fertility because they know fertility has plunged everywhere where you have nuclear reactors and also the development of the fuel. And so this is all part of a larger eugenics operation. It's clear now with the disaster in the last year, yesterday in France, the disaster in Canada that got no attention, the 50s disaster in Simi Valley that was bigger than Chernobyl that was covered up, Chernobyl, Fukushima, and government then trying to lie, getting caught, and no one even gets in trouble. At least the Japanese resigned. Here they would be promoted like 9/11. It's time to get rid of nuclear power. It's time to get it out of the ships.
I totally agree.
The boats. It's time to get it out of the subs. Look, they've got 2 reactors in Austin, and they're so good at keeping it quiet. I tell people at, cocktail parties, and they laugh at me saying, I would have heard. They're both up at the J.J. Pickle Center in North Austin. They're both dangerous research. And for folks that don't know about nuclear power, that means they're turning them on and off all the time. They're doing tests up there. And they've got research reactors all over the country. They've got level 4 bioweapons labs with stuff that will kill all humans it comes in contact with, that makes airborne Ebola look like child's play in hundreds of facilities in level 2 and level 3 containment. Again, it's like the corporate whores that run things have a death wish, and they want me to be scared of men with beards and turbans, and I'm sick of it.
Right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the biohazards, because if you come down to it, Alex, I think the top 3 greatest threats to the continuation of life on our planet, human life in particular, are, number 1, the solar flares wiping out modern civilization through the scenario we just described. Number 2 is GMOs and the genetic engineering and the DNA contamination of our planet. And number 3 is the bioweapons, the possible release, accidental or intentional, of infectious disease, level 4 bioweapons that devastate human populations. So those 3 are the big 3. Again, solar flares, GMOs, and bioweapons. And each one of those could destroy human civilization. In combination, we are really at risk, and we need to take action to stop these death worshipers from having such control over our planet.
Well, Mike, looking at this information, now we've got to hurry because we've only got a few minutes left here on InfoWars Nightly News. We normally just interview a guest for 10 minutes, but your information is so important, we could talk to you for hours. What do you make of the fact that Rick Perry's being excoriated for his attempted forced inoculation of schoolgirls with the admittedly deadly Gardasil, and the fact that more and more it's coming out that Merck is buying off legislatures to then try to force people to take stuff? I mean, this is the ultimate tyranny here, the ultimate civil rights issue.
Yeah. Well, it also shows the ultimate victory that we are achieving. InfoWars, Prison Planet, you, Alex, what an impact you're having, and Matt Drudge as well, because this issue has now become an attack point on Rick Perry, whereas several years ago, I think it was 2007 or 2008, when both InfoWars and Natural News first wrote about this issue, we were the lone voices in the wilderness criticizing Rick Perry for Gardasil vaccines. And people criticized us. They said, oh no, all these teenage girls, they have to be protected. They have to be made safe. And these vaccines are the best thing in the world. Well, that tide has turned. And now it's an attack point. It is rightly discrediting Rick Perry because he made the wrong decision, because he put teenage girls at risk. I believe he is indirectly responsible through his decision, through his false mandate, his hoax, that was a requirement. He is responsible for the maiming or perhaps even the deaths of some number of teenage girls who should be alive today.
There were deaths in Texas and other areas after it happened, and it helped them break the ice and try to get the forced mandate in other areas.